Quoting from a poem is pretty simple, and I'll show you how to do it here. When you quote part or all of a single line or verse of poetry, and remember the words line and verse are interchangeable, you put the passage within quotation marks like any other quote. Your citation will be a little bit different. You are going to include the author's name if it's the first reference, and then the line number or numbers, and that's where this is a little bit different. Let's look at an example from John McCrae's poem In Flanders Fields. As always, we're going to begin with a good lead-in sentence, and then we're going to encase our quote in quotation marks. In Flanders fields the poppies blow. There we go, encased in quotation marks. We're going to do our citation, which is going to be the author's last name, and then the line number or numbers. And this is only one line. It happens to be the first line. So 1, end parentheses, period. It's just that simple. If you use up to 3 lines or verses of poetry, everything stays pretty much the same. So you're going to encase your quote in quotation marks, but you're going to indicate the end of each line by using a slash with a space on either side of it. And then, of course, you would cite as normal. So it would look like this. Of course, we're going to begin with a good lead-in sentence, and then we're going to quote. And I'm just going to copy this here, save a little bit of time. The poppies blow. And now, since that's the end of a line, I'm going to do a space with a slash and another space, and then I'm going to type the next line. Between the crosses, row on row. And this is I'm going to even use a third line. So space, slash, space that mark our place. End of the quote, parentheses, and since this is my second quote, I'm just going to give the line numbers 1-3, and you'll notice that there are no extra spaces in there. If you want to quote more than 3 verses, each verse should begin its own line. So essentially, it becomes a block quote. Remember that block quotes are typically introduced with a colon. Then you indent each line that you quote 1 inch from the left margin, which means in MLA format that your quote will begin 2 inches from the left edge of the page. You double space between the lines as usual, and you do not use quotation marks around the quote. The 2-inch indentation from the left edge of the page indicates that this is a quote, a block quote. And then finally, you maintain end punctuation, and you put the citation on the same line with no punctuation after it. The same line as the last line with no punctuation after it. So let's see how this would look. We have our lead-in sentence, John McCrae's words evoke the somber realities of war. Now that's introducing a block quote, so I'm going to put a colon there instead of a period. Now I'm going to add the quote on a separate line, and I just have it copied here. So I've got the whole passage that I want to quote, but it's right up against my left margin. So it's at 1 inch right now, and we know it needs to go in an additional inch. So you could laboriously, double tab to get that over, or you can highlight the whole thing and then grab this little box up on the ruler and drag it over an additional inch, and there we have our 2-inch space, which indicates that it's a block quote. Now you'll notice that I don't have quotation marks here. This part right here, this indentation, tells the reader that it's a quote, and we don't need those quotation marks. So now I need my citation, and I put it on the exact same line, and this is lines 1 through 6. And again, typically what we would do with this period is get rid of it in favor of putting a period at the end of our parentheses. But because this is a block quote, it's treated a little bit differently, and the end punctuation stays, and we have no end punctuation there. So then you would simply hit enter, and of course you're going to need to go back to the left margin, and you would continue making your point. Now there's one other consideration. If one of the lines that you've quoted will not fit on one line of your paper, you simply continue it on the next line, but you indent it an additional 1/4 of an inch. So let's pretend that these two lines were just one line. I would indent this one an additional 1/4 of an inch, which would be right there, and that's how that would look. Okay, now one final thing. If the passage that you've selected begins in the middle of a line, you begin your quote where the partial line begins as accurately as you can. So let's take a look at this quote again. John McCrae's words evoke the somber realities of war. Well, let's say I didn't want the in Flanders Fields parts, but so I would get rid of that, and that automatically puts the poppies below flush left. But we don't want that. I want it to look like it sort of looked in the original, and I can't get it exactly right. And I'm also going to include, I'm going to get it as close as I can, but I don't have to worry about being 100% exact. I'm also going to include an ellipsis, which indicates that that this is not the beginning of the line. So that's quoting poetry. It's not that hard.